Well, good afternoon, everyone, witnesses and guests and members to the 7th meeting of the Legislative Committee on Bill C11. Again, I want to welcome you all. We did have 2 votes this afternoon, so unfortunately delayed us from getting here to start at 3:30, so of course we'll have to adjust the time during questioning. But welcome, and I'll introduce each of you. So starting with the Society for Reproduction Rights of Authors, Composers, and Publishers in Canada, Alain Lauzon and Martin Lavallee. From Two Cows, Elliot Noss. From Shaw Communications, Jean Brazeau, Cynthia Rathwell, and J. Curl Wilson. So I believe you've been all briefed by the clerk that each of you, not each individual, but each organization will have 10 minutes and 10 minutes only to present. So I will unfortunately step in after 10 minutes if you haven't wrapped up at that time. And so we'll start off with the Society for Reproduction Rights of Authors, Composers, and Publishers in Canada. So you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bonjour. Je remercie les membres du
Hello. I'd like to thank the members of the Legislative Committee for having allowed us to come and testify before you today. My name is Alain Lauzon, and I am General Manager of SODRAC. I am accompanied by Mr. Martin Lavallee, who's our Director of Licensing and Legal Affairs. SODRAC has existed for 25 years now. In music, we ensure the proper management of reproduction rights, and in terms of visual arts and crafts, we manage the entire body of work that we represent. As a collective management company, we play an important economic role for thousands of Canadian, Quebec, and foreign authors, composers, and publishers. All of these people are represented by us because sometimes copyright is the only way that a creator is compensated. Our members belong to 3 sectors of activity. That is to say, songs, audiovisual musical works for television, film, and video games, and thirdly, artistic works in visual arts and crafts. The Copyright Act is an essential foundation which provides creators with a with copyrights for the works that they create. The reproduction rights, which is separate from public performance right, is a fundamental right recognized in the Copyright Act as well as in international treaties and the Berne Convention, of which Canada is a signatory. The arrival of the Internet provoked technological changes that transformed the way works were distributed, broadcast, and consumed, which is why the Act must absolutely be modernized. The question, however, is at what price? Producers will tell you that the measures proposed with Bill C11 would suffice. Creators would beg to differ. In the area of music, Bill C11 will have a considerable impact on our rights holders. The introduction and the modification of exemptions for broadcasters, not extending the private copy regime for digital audio recorders, the exception of fair trading for educational purposes, all of these provisions would affect the source of existing sources of revenue and royalties. The bill also creates new exceptions that favor users and consumers without in any way compensating rights holders. This represents over 40% in lost royalties for authors, without taking into account the weakening of financial instruments that authors have used, which is to say management collectives. Also, the current bill does not solve legally nor monetarily the problem of illegal file sharing and the responsibility of Internet service providers. Music has never been so played, listened to, and copied. The Copyright Act must continue to provide us with the necessary legal framework to exercise the copyright for works of by authors, composers, and publishers that we represent, and to allow us to continue to play our role in society and for our company by properly compensating them. With respect to artistic works, we believe Canada should also adopt resale law, just as other 50 countries have, including the European Union. This would allow creators and their rights holders to benefit from a portion of resale price of their works. Creators must be able to participate entirely in this new culture and economy and digital economy thanks to the Copyright Act. We are in favor of the introduction of legal protections through TPMs such as digital locks, even if certain broadcasting formats do not yet support that use. Digital locks can be effective for certain areas, such as film, video games, even if they currently serve rights holders and producers rather than creators. Also, rather than creating exceptions without compensation, we believe we should that the licensing system should be used by management companies such as ours to provide access to works. We are just as effective as a user for users as for the rights holders, and ensuring compensation. Technical amendments that we are proposing in our brief are minimum threshold to avoid an irreversible imbalance between those who create content and those who use and consume them. In order to reestablish this balance, SADRAC has 13 specific recommendations for you today, with new formulations and that have been distributed to you this afternoon. We believe that these recommendations respect the will as expressed by the government, while avoiding any unnecessary disruptions between existing business relationships between creators and users. This is a business relationship that we're talking about here between an author and those who use the creation, what has been created, and who would be defending the effects of legislation with respect to copyright. It wouldn't be so much the consumers, broadcasters, internet service providers, nor teachers or professors. Not even the rights holders in certain cases. The Copyright Act protects the economic life of a work of art by providing greater accessibility to the creation of course, a reasonable economic value. When we talk about economic value, we're not talking about a tax or being paid twice. We're talking about people who are using this music and who are making music an essential aspect of their business model. But Bill C11, under its current form, is interfering in a private business relationship by creating many exceptions which sometimes are expressed in terms that go beyond the will clearly expressed by the government, or which may lead to unexpected consequences. As an example, I would like to mention two of our recommendations. The first one has to do with Section 3071, a so-called temporary reproduction. Government said that this section would not have any impact on the copyright because it covers temporary reproductions and technical reproductions, which is part of a technical process or a technological process. For example, caching over the Internet. However, the section deals with facilitating a technological process, which is so vague and broad that it could be falsely interpreted as including many digital reproductions whose value has already been established in the market, by the market. So it is necessary to specify that this type of reproductions is technical and without value, because if the use of such a temporary reproduction, now I'm making the distinction between not the final solution, just the temporary reproduction, is an advantage which is quantifiable for the user, and so the exception should not apply in this case. Furthermore, the title of the section mentions a temporary reproduction, but the word temporary isn't seen in the rest of the wording. They just talk about the length of the technological process, which is extremely vague. So the current sense of temporary means momentary or limited in time. We think that reproduction must be temporary or transitory. The second recommendation has to do with the exception for ephemeral recordings. Last week we discussed this at great length, and of course SADRAC doesn't quite understand the idea of obtaining a license for that type of company this type of reproduction, when we realized that the use of all reproduction rights by commercial radio stations in 2009 represented barely 1.4% of their annual revenues, whereas the music that they play is 80% of their programming. So we would prefer that Section 39.6 remain the same. However, the government does wish the rights holders to be properly compensated for copies of works that have been archived for over 30 days or kept for over 30 days. We would like to create automatic recopying and destruction systems for copies that would allow us to do indirectly what the bill forbids people from doing directly. For example, destroying the copy that's on the 29th day and then recopying it 2 days later, and going on and on a 30-day schedule in that way. So let's remember that any copy that lasts over 30 days cannot be called ephemeral. This is a reproduction of a work that's going to be used for many different things, and it's not a simple transfer. So DRAC pursues this type, has been collecting this type of royalties since 1992, so over 20 years. The radio industry has not exactly fallen apart during that time period. On the contrary, their profits have gone from 1 to 21% during that period. So the RAC therefore recommends that we integrate minor modifications to Section 34.2 to the bill. I'd like to thank the committee for their attention, and I invite them to read the other technical changes that we proposed in our brief, and which reflect more closely the intentions that have been expressed by the government. In closing, I would like to emphasize that SODRAC is supporting the recommendation and work of the following groups: CAMI, Coalition des ayants droit musicaux sur Internet, DAMIC, Multimedia Internet and Copyright Group, as well as the Coalition of Cultural Organizations under the coordination of the Canadian Coalition for the Arts. On behalf of SODRAC, I would like to thank the members of the committee for having listened to us. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Mr. Noss for 10 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Elliot Noss. I'm the CEO and president of Two Cows, Inc. I'd like to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to appear here today. And I'd like to start by thanking the totality of you for, perhaps it is third time lucky, but it appears that on the third pass we have copyright reform, or at least close to it, that looks like it will present a fair balance for all involved. And I think you all deserve a lot of credit for that and a lot of recognition for that. I want to contain my remarks today. I certainly have views up and down the elements of the legislation, but I want to contain my remarks today to a couple key areas where we at Two Cows have a specific window on the world, and I want to share some parts of our existence with you. Two Cows is a company that's been around really since the dawn of the Internet. Website started in 1993. We've been partnering with service providers around the world as a Canadian company really since 1995, since the dawn of the Internet. We invented wholesale domain registration. Today, we are by far the largest domain name registrar in Canada, with over 1.7 million domain names that are registered to Canadians. And importantly, over 2,300 Canadian customers. And I'm going to spend some time describing for you who our customers are and why they matter in this discussion. Our customers are best known as web hosting companies, as ISPs, certainly telcos and cablecos. But there's a huge swath of that 2,300 that isn't often enough talked about or understood. And those are smaller web hosting companies, web designers, VARs, and integrators who, across their businesses, employ tens of thousands of Canadians. We have about 12,000 service provider partners, so I'm just talking now about the 2,300 in Canada. These are the companies that put, essentially, small businesses, users, artists, and creators online and enable them to be able to actually take advantage of all the great benefits that the Internet brings. Sometimes, sadly, my customers are called by another insidious term, enablers. It is extremely important to understand that the bulk of small business today the bulk of users today. And when I'm talking about users now, I'm talking about people who have a daytime job and are starting a home business. And we all know that there's a transition in the economy now to self-employment. We're talking about people who are creators or aspiring creators themselves. They need help getting online. And they need help using the tools to take best advantage of it, whether it's registering a domain name, building and launching a website, having a Facebook page that's promoting what they're doing, a Twitter account, etc. The typical customer of ours might help 50 or 100 small businesses and end users. And when we talk about enabler provisions, those are the people that are just simply not understood. It's great for, and I love the fact that there are large telcos and ISPs who can be well represented in the policy field and in the legal field. Two Cows is a fairly small company, 100 million in revenue, not very big, but we can handle what we get in terms of incoming around intellectual property and copyright complaints. Those small businesses that I'm talking about, the ones who are the backbone of getting small business online, simply can't. Which means that any enabler legislation that is too broadly drafted, and frankly, the enabler legislation that we're seeing in front of us is the first that I've seen that's narrow enough to actually give the bulk, the backbone of that supply side for business a chance. Because that part was the first part that I'm going to talk about that we have intimate knowledge of. And I'm not talking about the most intimate knowledge in Canada. Two Cows is the world leader in wholesale internet services. We are known throughout the world as the best and biggest partner for service providers in the internet economy. So I'm giving you a Canadian view through a Canadian company of a global position. That also means, we have nearly 10% of the domain names in the generic domain name space. That also means that we see another element uniquely, and that is the day-to-day practice by which primarily intellectual property rights holders and their legal departments employ their tactics. So I'm going to give you a little window into our world. In 2011, Two Cows had over 300 complaints about intellectual property abuse. Exactly 0 of them came to anything. Now, I want to make sure that you don't think that that means that there is nothing wrong going on in our namespace. We have 10% of the problems if we have 10% of the registrations. We are regularly working with law enforcement, rights holders around things like phishing, child pornography, drugs, etc. But what we see is that typical practice for intellectual property rights holders, sadly, is to yell first, threaten first, and do everything they can to intimidate. I have to deal in the ICANN context, which is the Global Domain Name Regulator. And so I deal with intellectual property representatives from around the world, WIPO, etc. When I raise this with them, they don't deny it. They don't question it. They describe it as good practice. We are simply representing our client's interest as we should be. I don't question that. I don't question that. But when you all are looking at the enabler legislation that you're going to put in this bill, you need to remember that those are sharp knives. And it won't be those small businesses, the 5 or 10-man web hosting shop or the 2-man web design shop, who's going to be able to do anything but fold like a cheap tent when they're confronted with demands. I want to circle around to the top and I want to thank you all again. I want to note for you that the Internet is the greatest agent of positive change that the world has ever seen. Greater than the printing press, certainly greater than television or telephone. It is a platform. It is a platform for the future. Balanced public policy here won't be felt in 3 months or in a year. It'll be felt in 5 and 10 years. Canada right now has a rich creative landscape. I'm going to give you all a free tip. If any of you, you're obviously interested in this subject matter, if any of you have teenage daughters, I'm going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone for you. Take your daughter to see the Justin Bieber movie, Never Say Never. 2 reasons. 1, she will love you for it. 2, you will see what is acknowledged by Guy Kawasaki, who's a Silicon Valley legend, as the greatest movie on social media made to date. Canada's biggest recording star didn't get there because of labels. He got there because of user-generated content and a free and open internet and the platform that all creates. So I know that I'll be the only person speaking about those tens of thousands of employees, of those thousands of small businesses who represent millions of Canadian users in saying, you've got a balance now. Please keep it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Noss. I guess I'm renting Never Say Never for this weekend for my daughters and I to watch.
In the theater, man.
And with that, I now go to Shaw Communications for 10 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Jean Brazeau. I am the Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Government Relations at Shaw Communications. And with me today, to my left, is Cynthia Rathwell. She is the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs. And to my far left is J. Kerr Wilson of Fasken Martineau. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to present our views on Bill C11. Shaw Communications is a diversified company that offers a broad range of communications services, including cable and satellite television, high-speed internet access, home phone, and broadcasting. Through its various undertakings, Shaw creates, acquires, distributes, and transmits copyright-protected content to Canadians. As such, Shaw understands both the importance of effective copyright legislation to Canadians and the copyright rules must be carefully balanced to protect consumers' interests and support both creativity and innovation. In our view, copyright should support and encourage the development of legitimate markets and products and services. It should give rights holders adequate protection against infringement and the freedom to negotiate fair compensation for the use of their works. Copyright laws should not, however, erect barriers to innovation. They should support and not hinder the development of new services and new business models. They should foster partnerships between creators, distributors, and consumers. We are pleased to see that the government has taken a balanced, consumer-friendly approach to copyright reform in Bill C11. In particular, we fully support the Minister's statement that this legislation is intended to legalize everyday consumer activities, including time-shifting television programs, using cloud computing and remote storage services such as network personal video recorders, creating and sharing user-generated content, and moving content they have purchased on the device and have their content purchased on to the devices and into the format of their choice. We support the government's desire to achieve balance in the legislation, and we believe that Bill C11 has largely succeeded in achieving that balance. We would like to bring to the committee's attention 3 specific provisions of the legislation that we believe fall short of achieving the government's policy and could be remedied with a few minor and, for the most part, technical amendments. To ensure that Canada's new notice regime, which we strongly endorse, becomes a well-functioning and effective partnership between rights holders and ISPs, and that ISPs are not made responsible for any infringements by their customers, a few small technical amendments to Bill C11 are needed. The details are set out in our written brief. In general, however, Shaw strongly believes that the ISP's obligation to deliver notices and retain data must come into effect at the same time as regulation that standardize the required notice format and set maximum fees for the provision of notices. The new automated notice system that ISPs must design to comply with the new regime can only be effective if rights holders' notices contain consistent information and formatting. As such, it is appropriate that new notice requirements come into effect pursuant to the regulations that ensure that notice systems can be built and operated efficiently. Second, the legislation provides for a specific exemption that permits consumers to record on time-shift television programs for viewing at a later time. The Minister has stated that this exemption and the hosting exception are intended to work together to permit network personal video recorders, PVRs, services to operate without incurring copyright liability. Shaw fully supports the government objective to permit network PVR services. We are concerned, however, that the hosting provision, as currently drafted, is not as clear as it could be in expressing the government's intention to enable cable and satellite companies to offer consumer NPVR service. To put it simply, a network PVR has to perform two separate functions to operate. It has to make a copy of the television program that the consumer wants to record, and it has to transmit that program to the consumer when the consumer wants to see it. The bill, as drafted, provides a clear exception to copyright for the recording of the television program by the network PVR service, but is silent as to the transmission of that same program. We submit, with respect, that the bill would benefit from additional clarity if exempting the network PVR provider from liability when the program is transmitted to the consumer for viewing. The current lack of clarity could lead to vexatious litigation and stand as a barrier in the provision of network PVR services to Canadian consumers. We believe that a minor technical amendment to the existing provision will make it clear that a network PVR provider does not incur copyright liability for either hosting or transmitting a television program that have been recorded at the request of the consumer. We have provided the clerk with a specific technical amendment recommended to accomplish that very end. Our final concern is with the provision that applies to the sale of content online, specifically language of the making available right. As drafted, the legislation could treat every transmission over the Internet as if it was a broadcast to the public. This means that if someone buys a copy of a song from a service like an iTunes, that transaction will be treated the same as if the song was played on the radio. We think it is far more appropriate to treat an online sale of a song or movie or game the same as if that song, movie, or game was purchased in a store. As a result of the approach taken in the legislation, online transactions involving music in Canada will not be freely negotiated between parties, but will require the intervention of the Copyright Board to set the prices to be paid for music. This will produce what we believe to be unintended results. Under the approach taken by Bill C11, negotiating with the composer for a fair price to sell the game or on the Internet is not even an option. The same problem will apply to the online sale of movies, television programs, and other forms of multimedia entertainment. Given the government's desire to encourage Canadians to be innovative and leaders in the digital economy, we do not believe that copyright legislation to prevent parties from freely negotiating licensing agreements and instead impose input pricing set by the Administrative Tribunal. In our respectful view, it would be far more reasonable and consumer-friendly to apply the same rules to the sale of products in the online world as applies to the sale of products in the retail world. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we believe that Bill C11 is an important measure to modernize Canada's copyright laws. We support the pro-consumer exceptions and the enhanced protection against piracy. Subject to our suggested amendments to better reflect government policy, Shaw thinks that that Canada and Canadians will be well served by this bill. We would be pleased to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brazeau. So now we will go to the first round of questions for 5 minutes, and starting us off is Mr. Braid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of the witnesses for being here this afternoon. Mr. Brazeau, I wanted to start with a couple of questions for yourself, please. Could you comment on the merits of a notice and notice approach as opposed to notice and takedown?
Well, we certainly think that the notice is a far less intrusive means in order to ensure that the government achieves its policy objective. And we would be very concerned if we started taking down service to our customers. The response by the customers, I think, would be significantly negative to those measures. And again, I think the measure is somewhat too draconian, and we can achieve the same objective with the notice of notice.
Right. Some ISPs today are voluntarily notifying copyright infringers on the Internet. Is that the case with your company?
We are currently doing that, yes.
Okay, great. I think it's fair to describe your company as an Internet intermediary, if you will. Do you feel that Bill C11 has the right measures, the right recognition, the right provisions with respect to your company's role as an intermediary? Notwithstanding the technical amendments that you've spoken to.
Notwithstanding those technical amendments, we are very supportive of the legislation.
Okay. Could you speak to the importance of the safe harbor provisions in the legislation? And
Let
why?
Jay deal with that issue.
Okay.
So certainly, every jurisdiction in the world that has looked at implementing the WIPO treaties has understood that providing safe harbors for intermediaries is essential. And to echo the testimony had by Jacob Glick from Google, the investment community is also recognized that providing clarity with respect to intermediary liability and having clear and effective safe harbors is critical to having an environment where investors feel safe in supporting innovative new products and services.
Okay. And do you feel that C11 provides that?
Yeah, certainly, again, subject to the technical amendments Shaw has put forward, but by recognizing the specific roles for hosting and for providing Internet access and for exempting liability for those functions, C11 takes the right approach.
Great. Mr. Noss, do you think it's important that Canada respects and ratifies and adheres to the WIPO treaties? Finally.
Respect, yes. Necessarily ratifies, not so much. I mean, there's a very interesting trend going on, where goals that can't be achieved in domestic politics are trying to be achieved through international politics. And that's very worrisome. I'll tell you something that happened just in the last couple of weeks that's simply never happened before. I got 3 separate phone calls from large U.S. service providers coming out of the SOPA PIPA goings-on in the U.S.
Were these
asking
robocalls?
me, sorry?
Were these robocalls?
No, they weren't.
Okay.
Yes. He was just taking away your material in case you went to. So, they were asking about the climate in Canada around some of these issues, and we're pursuing, on behalf of their clients, locating significant stores of data, moving them, American companies, American clients, moving them to Canada because the climate might be healthier. These were not illegitimate companies. These were very large companies that would all be familiar to you. There is a fear of overreach out there. And if Canada can be a world leader in that regard, then that, to me, is much more important, not only to our economy, but to a healthy open Internet, which is what I care about for my children.
Okay. There isn't overreach in C11, is there?
C11 feels comfortable to me.
Thank you.
30 seconds.
I think that's a great place to end.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Braid. Now moving to Mr. Angus for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Very interesting discussion all the way around. I want to follow up on the question from my colleague in the last round. Mr. Noss, you said that you like the balance, but you talked about your concern about enabling language. I'm looking that you're a member of the Business Coalition for Balanced Copyright, and there are some pretty
That's right.
heavy-duty players in that. Given the experience with SOPA and the huge backlash that burned many U.S. politicians' fingers on that, do you see language that can work in terms of dealing with, we all have a common interest in going after people who should be shut down.
That's right.
We also share a common interest in ensuring that we don't destroy the platform that is still emerging. So is there language that you've seen that can actually focus in on this? Is this the time? What's your recommendation?
So I will tell you that when I dug into C11 as it currently stands, I was pleasantly surprised, would be the right way to put it. The appropriate expansion of exceptions for fair dealing, the notice and notice provisions, the statutory damages. There were 3 or 4 things in there that I would describe as world-leading, where Canada really has an opportunity to set a model for the rest of the world. And the interesting thing about that is there are countries all over the world, again, I meet with representatives in the ICANN context, who are just looking for an alternative to some of the heavy-handedness that's going on in a couple of other jurisdictions, U.S. in particular, sadly. And so I think there's a fantastic opportunity and a uniquely Canadian opportunity here.
Thank you. Mr. Lauzon, I was interested. We've talked many, many times over the years, and I was interested that you defined copyright in such a, I guess, perhaps it's simplistic, but at its root, you said that copyright is a payment that's a fundamental right, that this is at the heart of so much of what we're talking about is who gets paid and when they get paid. And I've been noticing at our committee hearings, my colleagues in the Conservative Party think copyright, they call it a tax. They use it all tax all the time. They talk about it's not fair to business. And yet, when talking about the ephemeral exemption that's being created, it seems that something that has been adjudicated by the Copyright Board that has defined a right to be paid, the $20 million that musicians receive, that artists receive, that publishers receive, that they want to use an exemption to deny people who've been adjudicated at Copyright Board the right to be paid. Do you believe that that's the role of government, is to intervene in the Copyright Board and say, not only you're not getting that $20 million, but hey, while we're at it, we're taking the $30 million that you received off the digital levy as well. So we're taking $50 million. We're going to intervene in your business model and say that that's fair. What is the feeling of the members of SODRAC?
The Copyright Board is recognized worldwide as a place that establishes the value of the right, and participants are using it, especially in the reproduction right, where in the law we can negotiate with our partner, we can go as an arbitration, or we can go for a tariff. So the Copyright Board established the tariff and look at the practices. You members of the committee, you have to establish the rules under which the copyright owners, who are the creators, are going to be paid, remunerated. I mentioned in my text that sometimes, especially in music, copyright is the only remuneration that they receive. When I pay every 3 months my 2,500 members who are songwriters, composers, and publishers, copyright is the only money that they receive. They receive money from us, which is the reproduction right. They receive money from SOCAN, which is the performing right. So they receive different types of rights, but these rights are all recognized. And so that's why in the legislation that you have to bring forward in that new digital economy, you have to bring rules that protect the creation of the work for the creators that we have.
Thank you, Mr. Lauzon and Mr. Angus. You're out of time. Now moving on to Mr. McColman for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for being here and providing your thoughts and ideas on a on helping us determine what that balance is. And I just might comment on my colleague's comments that just finished. I don't think anyone at this table is looking to not strike the right balance and make sure the creators and the people who create the work, the artists of the world, don't get compensated properly. Perhaps the structure of that is what we're considering in terms of how we strike the right balance to make sure that they are treated fairly. And so when I hear comments, Mr. Noss's comments and the comments from the shop representatives in terms of seeing what I would call this as a huge moment of opportunity for our country. And I heard the Google representative, Mr. Glick, talk about his vision for what Canada could be in a digital environment if we get this right. This is hugely important to us. And so, Mr. Noss, my question would be to you. You talked about your customers and their customers. And I'd like you to, if you could, because I did appreciate the way that you addressed us in terms of describing that structure for everyday Canadians to be able to understand it. Can you take it from the small business person that's out there who is dealing with maybe the two-person operation that you said would be lost if we didn't get this right? Could you talk a little bit more about that and how important that is to local economies such as my community?
Sure. The Internet has really, from its inception, from the launch of dial-up, been a local business, and it's been millions and millions of local businesses. In the early days, every single country or every single city in Canada had local ISPs as the first or second or third biggest. It was only with broadband and big infrastructure that changed. In web hosting, it is a local business. In web design, it's a local business. What happens, on occasion is you have what I would call chilling effects. And, if the provisions are too broad, then they will be used, and they will be used to intimidate and to discourage. And it's the smaller on the supply side who get most hurt by that. We're dealing on behalf of our customers all the time, and when I say all the time, weekly, with just a lament. I don't know what to do. I've had this threat brought to me. I've had this this demand brought to me, and it's equal parts, by the way. A legal practice that's unsophisticated about Internet matters, just like a lot of us are, and overreaching. You get equal parts of both, but the outcome is the same. And again, that's why I like that phrase, sharp knives, because what you provide in the legislation, we all, as Mr. Angus said, we all want the bad guys stopped. And service providers probably work harder at that, than anybody else in the Internet community. But, boy, those sharp knives fall hardest on the smallest.
Right, and we also heard this from people who are distributing works through, and specifically small radio outlets, people who, are employing maybe up to 50 employees in their operations, and some of the things, the challenges they face in terms of making sure that they do pay and they pay their fair share, but they don't pay too much because someone in this equation has a sense of perhaps their own interest, and it leads to them wanting more of the equation than really the equation can handle, or it all collapses because everybody's so interdependent. And I would also say that and I'd like the Shaw people maybe to comment on this if you would, wouldn't it be advantageous to all the players if the balance is struck the right way, if we have that incredible opportunity as a country to expand our digital commerce? Wouldn't it be such a great benefit to the creators, to the people who are creating the works, because of what opens up to them?
I totally agree with that statement. The more restrictions, I was listening to Mr. Noss's comment, the more restrictions you put on the service provider, the ISPs, the more cost we incur. The more cost we incur, the more expensive it becomes to build out these networks. We have some of the best networks in the world. We are a leader when it comes to broadband in the world. And if you start nickel and diming and a little cut here and a little cut there, then all of a sudden the incentives to build out this network and to remain in the forefront and continue to be world leaders in broadband just evaporates. And I think the unintended consequences of some of these proposals are very significant.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
That's why we believe this balance.
Thank you, Mr. Brazo and Mr. McCoolman. Now on to Mr. Regan for the last 5 minutes of the first round.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with Mr. Brazo. Mr. We're already going. Might as well keep going a bit more. But I'd like to talk about something a bit different, and that is what time will it require for ISPs to comply with the notice and notice provisions? What kind of complications are there in that, and what problems do you see?
Well, it is, we think we are probably handling, several thousands of these requests per month. And so the volume is fairly significant. And we want to make sure that there is a consistency in the industry on how we deal with them. And so we think that it would probably need a period of about 12 months for the industry to establish, the right guidelines, the right framework in order for all of us to deal with these notices requests in a structured way.
When we deal with this question, notice, we've got two fundamental problems. On the one hand, an ISP has a difficulty being an arbiter and deciding when there's infringement, when there's not, and that's the problem with notice and takedown. Obviously, is that they're asking the ISP to be the arbiter. The other problem, of course, is that for a creator, particularly a small artist, for them to enforce, with a lawsuit, right, every single infringement of their copyright, obviously is impractical and impossible. And so you've got the problem of how do you ensure that, how do you reduce the amount of copyright fraud, infringement, while at the same time ensuring that artists get compensated. We had one witness who suggested we need to have some kind of made-in-Canada solution that overcomes that, particularly for smaller players. Do you have anything in mind that might work?
We think the notice of notice would work effectively.
But how does that work for the small creator who can't afford to pursue every individual case of infringement, or let alone one sometimes?
Jay, do you have anything to...
I would say that, certainly even for small creators, what they need is the opportunity to reach their market. And certainly the Internet is, again, Google testified, gives unprecedented ability for the small creators to reach and find their audiences and to sell. So we need to have the tools in place that promote legitimate markets and to restrict infringing behavior. And, I think this committee and the Bill C-32 committee heard lots of testimony that notice and notice does provide a significant deterrent to infringing behavior, and then we'll give the tools for the legitimate market. So you drive people away from the infringing behavior and towards legitimate services, legitimate service providers, and the small person has, the small creator has unprecedented ability to now access that marketplace and to find their audience and to find their consumers and to engage in very small transactions that will be profitable.
Mr. Noss, I have the impression you're on the edge of your seat and wanted to answer this question.
Well, I'll just briefly say that small creators who appreciate that sharing is the way to become big creators are the ones who have the best chance of getting there. And small creators who really try and restrict sharing of their content tend not to get there.
So how do you see creators being, what are the models you see that are going to result in creators being compensated?
Well, I think that what we're seeing now is really twofold. We see innovative creators get themselves out there massively through sharing. And then you see now the most innovative models, and the ones that are capitalizing most effectively are the ones that are doing it through concerts and merchandising, etc. There still is a fantastic opportunity to get paid straight around music consumption if it only wasn't made so complicated.
You suggested that ISPs work harder than than anybody.
I said service providers, I'm sorry.
Service providers.
Because that's
I
a
think
broader
it's-
category
Sure it
for
is.
me.
Pardon me. Drop the I for a moment at stopping the bad guys, as you put it.
Right.
So does Notice sort of remove some of that responsibility, and what do the service providers do to stop the bad guys?
No, so there's two things there. One, Notice, I think, refines the responsibility appropriately. No service provider wants bad guys on their network. And the interesting thing is, so often there are innocent transgressions that Notice solves without the classic, record label taking grandma to court story. Most people, when they hear about problems, simply go away. It's the real offenders, the massive bad guys, who you're not going to get with Notice and Takedown. There is where you need the big stick. So, I think that when I'm talking about service providers sort of helping, they really are the ones who, at the front lines, are doing a lot of that enforcement, because it's way easier to be smart about it up front and to play, to have a straight game. So,
thank you, Mr. Noss and Mr. Regan. I know your 5 minutes goes by quickly, as does for everyone else. But we will now start the second round of 5 minutes of questioning, and we'll be starting with Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all our witnesses today. I'm going to start with Mr. Noss. I was very interested in your comments that the legislation we have before us is going to give Canada the opportunity to really expand the business we're going to be doing in this country, and creating a bigger pie for everyone to engage in, particularly smaller operators. Could you expand on how this legislation is going to enable us to do that?
So, most importantly, you have a growing, thriving industry of small service providers. They're not asking for incentives. They're not asking for financial support. They're simply asking to be allowed to grow and take advantage of what they can do without having, sort of inbound disruption or discouragement. So simply, removing those threats, which some previous forms of the legislation, could have provided, is huge. Really, what they need is that chance. And then what I think this does for Canada is Canada becomes an attractive destination around creativity and the open internet. And that does not mean in any way, safe harbor for pirates and, cue the scary music. It is, instead, it will get creative innovators who simply want to be in an environment where they can do what they do best without having to worry about the noise that might attend some overreaching legislation.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to Shaw, Mr. Brazeau. You talked about time and format shifting, and you said that sort of the top end of that, the legislation deals with very well. I'm talking about the recording and moving the recording around. But you said the back end of that, which is the rebroadcast or the transmission of that data after it's been reformatted or time shifted, needs a little work. And you said the way it is worded now might lead to some sort of vexatious legal actions. Can you expand on that and discuss what you're talking about there?
Yeah, I'll let Jay, who's the lawyer here, chirp in a minute. Our big concern is that there is certainly an explicit provision on the recording, but there's silence on the transmission. Now, we think you can't have one without the other. But the problem is that we've certainly been involved with other issues where there's not an explicit exemption, then it could be challenged, and that's what we're concerned with. Which I don't know if you want to add.
So the concern is on the hosting exception, which is the part where you make the storage, you store the copy into the host. The existing language talks about providing digital memory and that act alone as being not an infringement of copyright. So the concern is if someone were to think of the copy and the transmission out as two separate acts, then it could lead to someone asking a court to say, well, the copy was covered, but the transmission out is not that act alone, it's some second act. So all Shaw has proposed is to tweak it so explicitly making the copy and transmitting the copy back to the person would all be covered under the same exception. So it's not an expansion, it's just clarifying the intent.
Sure. Thank you for that. Moving on to some of your comments, Mr. Brazeau, about the sale of content online. And you discussed how, as we move into the future, more and more people are doing all kinds of shopping online, not just for digital media. You said that we should treat this more like you do retail. When you actually go into a shop, the same rules and regulations should apply. Could you give some specific examples of how we could do that with this legislation?
Jay, I'm not sure if we recommend
Sure.
any specific.
So the issue is in 2.41.1 of the existing bill, which would treat any transmission over the Internet as a communication to the public by telecommunication, which is generally the right that's applied to broadcasting activities. So what Shaw has suggested is you can have broadcasting activities over the Internet, and in that case the communication right should apply and the right should be paid. But when you're selling a copy to a consumer that's replacing the sale, if I walked into Best Buy, then the reproduction right should apply. So rights holders still get paid. It would be a negotiated agreement with the rights holders for the sale of that copy. You just wouldn't then also treat it as a broadcast because it's been transmitted over the Internet.
Great. Back to Mr. Noss. You talked about, for example, I'm from a small rural community. We don't expect Google to move anytime soon, or Tucows for that matter. But we do have several mom-and-pop organizations with, actually I have one family. There's 5 of them working in this area. How is this legislation going to help them grow their business or help other people establish businesses in the rural parts of the country?
So I think that one of the marvels of the Internet is you become locationless. You'd be amazed at what the small towns that huge hosting companies grow out of. In fact, most often they are not located in larger urban centers because their customers are all over the world and their cost base is better in a smaller community. So it's kind of two things. First is removing the threats, which I've now talked about a few times. I can't overstate how important that is because that burden falls on the small who become the medium size and the big. And the second thing is it just cultivates that open Internet. The Internet is at its heart.
We are well over time, Mr. Noss, so if you could wrap up, please, very quickly.
Communications medium, a share and collaboration medium. That means the more people to share with, the better off it is.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Noss and Mr. Armstrong. Now moving to Monsieur Nantel pour 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here. I would like to ask the representatives of SODRAC whether they agree with what I'm saying. We agree that the problems that people in the music industry are facing will soon hit people in the video world. It's just a matter of time, right? So the problems, difficulties that the music industry has encountered over the last 20 years is coming up. Now, people in the video industry may be a bit less sensitive to that descent into hell, but it's probably in their future. Also, 90% of file sharing is illegal, and given the bill before us, it doesn't do anything to protect artists against that situation of how all of their materials is being ripped off on the Internet. How would you react, and how could you explain that they had the nerve to withdraw $20 million in mechanical rights from artists? And this was something that was there, all these people around the table. The people who are being the most deprived are creators, because we are depriving them of $20 million worth in rights. How would you react to that statement? Well, when you say that eventually the video industry will go through what the music industry is going through, well, music is instant, video it takes a bit longer. So there is pirating going on, and there are illegal copies around, but I think that they are bigger players. So this act, of course, doesn't have anything to do with foreign sites, and other parts of the bill will provide us with technological protection measures. But for music, we don't have any such protections. historically, it's always been an open sharing. Now, people who are here and proponents of an open internet, well, frankly, I can't understand. Rights holders want to be compensated. I can see no business case in there. All those who are using the business case argument are those who are using the rights. It's incredible. And to complete those comments, we heard expressions like we want an open, free and open internet, we want massive sharing, and perhaps dollar signs will come out of this eventually. And people want, and they're saying that they want to be allowed to grow. But then on the other hand, there's talking about a chilling effect, about bullying and threats and onerous and litigious suits. So where does that leave all the creators? But where is the technological neutrality, too? The Copyright Act is supposed to be neutral. This is something that exists in the old economy and is continuing to exist in the new economy. In our memory, we see and we understand measures that have an impact on consumers and non-commercial practices. But when you start talking about the commercial areas of practice, this is where you see this imbalance between the value that the artist deserves to get and profitability for commercial industries who are making money, as Mr. Lauzon is saying, on the backs of the artists. Thank you. I would like to hear what the people at Shaw think about the way of holding a directory on people who are infringing copyright with notice and notice. But before that, if you have time, Mr. Noss, you say that you know all of your clients. May I ask you, since you're hosting it, who's the client behind nomilcare.ca? I know you won't tell me. Don't even bother answering.
Went out there. Who was the client behind?
Nomilcare.ca, because it's supposedly behind a two-cow domain name.
Oh, well, I'd have to look.
Thank you for the discussion on the leadership. You've got a few minutes left, so you might want to go to.
May I ask Mrs. Radwood or Mr. Brazo or Mr. Wilson to tell me more about the repertoire, the way the registering of the notice and notice that you have? How do you manage to keep the data potentially if it's needed?
Thank you. Well, currently, notice and notice is a voluntary undertaking, and so we receive, as Mr. Brazo was saying, over 100,000 notices per month. So at this point, we do not have an automated system with which we can issue notices, and therefore it becomes very important going forward with the introduction of regulations in this bill to ensure that the regulations introduce a standardized format with very clear criteria for what a notice should contain, and for and then, as required by the bill, we will maintain the subscriber data for a 6-month period. But without a thoroughly standardized approach with regulation, it's very prohibitive.
Thank you, Ms. Rathwell and Monsieur Nantel. Now moving on to Mr. Lake for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for coming today. I'm going to turn to Mr. Lauzon, if I could, and just ask the question, when you're advocating for increased levies, as you are, I'd like to know what specific technologies you'd be advocating for those levies to apply to.
We're talking about private copying.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about monetization, about ISPs.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the fact that there's a value to the work that is used by the consumer or by the ISPs in using those works.
So
for a copyright owner.
I wasn't asking for so much a rationalization, because you've given that, I think, already. Specific technologies that you'd be talking about that levies should apply to.
I don't know. We have to look at around the world. There's multiple technology that we can have.
But you must have some idea of.
Yeah, well,
I'm sure you give it some
if you
thought.
look at some countries, they have used the three-strike.
Should it apply to an iPod?
Sure, why not?
An iPad?
Sure, why
A
not?
laptop?
Sure.
The internet?
It's another way. It's another way of monetize the value of the right. There's a value.
So you say a laptop. Sure, I'm going to use that example. So you say a laptop. Yes. Okay. So you referred to a business model. That it's not a tax. That it's a business model. How could you justify the business model as it relates to someone who might buy a laptop and not use it for music at all or any other creative use?
When we go in front of the copyright board, okay, the copyright board does not give any royalties based on what we ask. What they do, they ask us, let's say like CPCC, and they are well informed of it there. They do some surveys of what it's done. When we received the private copying levy out of the board, that decision, that was done by surveys, it was done by studies and all that. So it's not the creators who went in front of the copyright board and say, we want to have that level of money. It's becoming a kind of a value argument in front of the copyright board.
But you argued that it was a business model. Again, how do you set up a business model that collects money for you from someone that doesn't even use your product? That's a dream business model, I would suggest.
You know, there's a way where you will have to remunerate the value of the songs that are created for the songs.
But there were
That's
many.
for sure.
There are many who have come before the committee and said that we are doing that. That's exactly what C11 does. It actually creates value for creators because it takes away the ability for people to pirate creative works and creates an environment where creators can be paid for what they create. So better quality product will be compensated for more.
We don't see in the law that you create value for the creators. You create value for part of the ayant droit, okay? But it's mainly producers. We don't see that. What we see is that we have rights that are not, that in the law, we have it in the law, but they are not getting to be paid. Broadcast mechanical, private copying, you're not extended to DER.
I want to just transition, if I could, to the broadcast mechanical. Is it accurate to say that if you add the reproduction, the $21 million for the reproduction right that you talk about, and the money from the performance right that radio stations pay, is it fair to say that more money is paid today than was paid 10 years ago?
Obviously,
is it fair to say that if you take away the $21 million for the reproduction right, is it fair to say that substantially more money is paid today just for the performance right alone than was paid 10 years ago?
I'm not in the business of the performing right, but as legislators, you have decided in 1997 to bring other rights, which was the rights to the performing artists and the record companies, what we call neighboring rights. Up to a certain point, it was in the law. It has an effect. That's for sure that will increase.
There's been many, though.
The second thing is SOCAN. The second thing is SOCAN. They had a rate. They had an increase of rate in the period that in the last 5 or 6 years. They have that rate in the last 20 years. And the reproduction right at SODRAC, obviously it's another right. But we're having in Canada here that discussion. But all around the world, in Europe, there is no discussion about that. They are paying the neighboring rights. They are paying the reproduction right. They are paying the performing rights. They are all paying that. It's only here that we have that discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Lauzon. Mr. Lake, unfortunately, we're well over the 5 minutes. So that will conclude our second round of questioning, and with that, I'd like to thank our witnesses for coming today. Your perspective and your thoughtful input to this committee is much appreciated. To the committee members, we will now break for 4.5 minutes. We will start at 5 o'clock on the dot to ensure that we can get through the entire second round in the next session. With that, we will suspend for 4.5 minutes. ladies and gentlemen, members, witnesses, again, welcome to the second half of the 7th meeting of the Legislative Committee on Bill C11. Again, I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses, and once I get my, I'd like to welcome from Epitome Pictures, Stephen Stone, the Directors Guild of Canada, Mr. Gary Barr, and Tim Southam, and from the Writers Union of Canada, Greg Hollingshead, and Miss Marion Hebb. Again, welcome everyone. I know you've been briefed by the clerk that each organization will have 10 minutes to present. So we will give you that 10 minutes, and we will start, of course, with you, Mr. Stone.
Thank you very much. Epitome Pictures, Inc. is a small business. We're a mom-and-pop shop. I'm the president. My wife is the CEO. She's more important than I am, as it should be. We've been in business, though, for nearly a third of a century. We're a television production company, and our main, the one that you would know the most, is the Degrassi series that we produce. I'm also the chair of Orange Lounge Recordings, which is a record company and does things that a record company does on the internet, including using all the facilities available, the top spins and the iTunes and every conceivable form of exploitation on of the digital rights, but also does an innovative co-venture with Simpatico, in which we produce video concerts of artists who come into Toronto. We bring them into the studio and do a live session with them, which is then broadcast on the internet. They're called Live at Orange. There's dozens of Canadian acts who've done this, some well-known like Nelly Furtado and Avril Lavigne, others not as well-known, but many famous international acts, and I include Katy Perry and Amy Winehouse and the Pussycat Dolls and One Republic. Just to say that I'm immersed in the digital world. And on Degrassi in specific, or coming back to the television production side, our Liberty Street series, which started in 1995, was the first series in the world to launch simultaneously on air and with a website. Our Riverdale series, which we started in 1997 and starred some very famous and talented Canadians, including most notably Tyrone Benskin, was the first series in the world to launch a companion web video series. It was a weekly series, in effect a behind-the-scenes soap opera. The new version of Degrassi, starting in 2001, launched a groundbreaking website at a cost of more than $1.5 million to enroll fans in the Degrassi school and engage them in interactions with our fictional characters. In effect, it was a proprietary MySpace long before MySpace was ever invented. Degrassi was the first series in the world to produce video webisodes featuring ongoing stories, featuring our main sets, our main cast, our main writers, and being shot with our main crew. And Degrassi was also the first series to make full episodes legally available in Canada, both for download and streaming. And we've experimented with various alternatives since then, including making episodes available on the internet prior to broadcast. Then we tried a week prior, we tried 24 hours prior, we tried 24 hours after, and now we simply go simultaneous on iTunes and on the web. And an entire season of Degrassi, which now is 45 episodes, is available in Canada. It's the Much Music website for free. There's advertising, but an entire season is available for the fans. If you search Degrassi on Google, you'll get over 11 million hits. We have over 3 million likes, fans on Facebook. And interestingly, if you search Degrassi mashup on Google, you'll get more than 1 million hits. And the list goes on. We have very active Twitter accounts where our characters, we actually have our writers provide Twitter feeds for our characters. We do vlogs and blogs. We have a Degrassi game already in the App Store. We have another app coming out, a co-viewing app coming out this summer. everything digital we can think of. And I'll note that our new series, the LA Complex, which launches next month in the United States, will launch simultaneously on the CW, which is an over-the-air network, on iTunes, Amazon, and all the download services, but also on Hulu, which is a Netflix type of service. So I mention all of this not to pat ourselves on the back, but rather to make it clear that while we are grateful for the legacy modes of distribution, we love our television broadcasters, they are a linchpin, that is not where we are fixated at all. We are and intend to always be on the absolute forefront of the new media. I am not a university professor who has a well-intentioned but perhaps ultimately misguided theories about what might or might not work on the Internet. I am part of a passionate, active, engaged team who is immersed day in and day out in the actual practicalities of the digital world. And I've got two key takeaway messages that I would like to put to you today. First, we producers are devastated by the torrents and the cyber lockers who take the shows that take us so much time and effort to produce. They make money from them and return nothing to us. More and more, every day, we rely on return of our investment from digital rights, from legal authorized streaming from broadcaster websites or from Netflix or Hulu type services, legal authorized downloads from iTunes or Amazon type services, and dozens of other legally authorized digital services that make Degrassi available today. So the first key takeaway from us is please pass C11 as a matter of extreme urgency. The second key message is also a plea to please make all the necessary technical changes so that the intent of C11 is actually carried into effect. I am not here today to discuss commas here and reasonables there. I leave that to the experts such as my brilliant friend Barry Sookman and our CMPA Producers Organization and others such as Music Canada and the Motion Picture Association of Canada. But it is my understanding that if implemented today as currently drafted, BC11 would have the perverse effect of inadvertently sheltering the very websites, services, and illicit activities that the government was intending to eliminate. So please, we need absolute clarity that the BitTorrent sites like IsoHunt and the cyber lockers like Mega Video are put out of business in Canada. And finally, I'd like to discuss mashups. We love mashups. As noted before, there are myriad Degrassi mashups available throughout the web, and to us they are a confirmation of our fans' loyalty and engagement, and that is something we embrace and applaud vigorously. What we don't love is drafting in C11 that we are told may permit all or substantially all of an episode to be downloaded or streamed under a wraparound loophole in the mashup language. And we don't love anyone making money from these mashups, including by advertising surrounding or adjacent to the mashups, without us being mandated to share in that revenue. We need revenues from our digital endeavors to continue producing our shows. We can't compete with free, and we don't want others making money from our hard work and investment without being allowed to share in the return. So in summary, our plea is to pass C11 urgently, but please include the technical amendments necessary to clearly eliminate torrents and cyber lockers and to ensure that the mashup exception truly applies only to what the government really means by a mashup, what we all really mean by a mashup, not to wraparounds and other loopholes. And thank you very much for your invitation to make these comments.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Now to the Directors Guild for 10 minutes.
Thank you. And members of the committee. My name is Jerry Barr. I'm the National Executive Director and CEO of the Directors Guild of Canada. And with me today is Tim Southam, a director of both television and feature film on both sides of the border, and chair of the Directors Guild National Directors Division. And to sort of anchor him for you, he's, for those of you who watch The House, his most recent work was in evidence in last week's episode of The House. So if you want any backstory on, if you're a fan of that show and want any backstory, he's the guy to go to. This is, of course, a series that has more than 50 million viewers around the world, and it's a classic example of what Canadian audiovisual industry can do, both at the level of quality and dramatic series. DGC is a member of Mr. Stone's day in, day out crowd. As a national membership-based labor organization, it represents over 3,400 key creative and logistical personnel in the film and television and digital media industry. And we're pleased that after more than a decade and numerous attempts, copyright legislation in Canada will be updated with the passage of this bill. Bill C11 brings our copyright regime into compliance with WIPO treaties. It takes steps to protect creators from content theft. It classes parody and satire as new categories for fair dealing, rightly, and it attempts to modernize Canadian copyright laws for a new digital age. All of this is very welcome. The preamble to the bill sets out the importance of clear, predictable, fair rules to support creativity and innovation, as well as for legislation that provides right holders with recognition, remuneration, and the ability to assert their rights. Well, we naturally strongly support those principles, and we're here to say that Bill C11 still needs some help to live up to those important goals. As an organization with members who both create and use copyright works, we know that copyright reform is a balancing act, and we're here today to ask for technical change to ensure that Bill C11 contains the clear rules that are called for in that preamble. Clarity is at the heart of effective copyright legislation. Creators and copyright holders need to know where they stand. What limitations are there in place to benefit users' access to the works that they create? The absence of clarity leads inevitably to the courts to decide these matters. Costly, time-consuming litigation benefits no one, not creators, not users, not others in the production chain, and should never be seen as preferable to clear and predictable legislative rules. Technical amendments can protect rights holders' revenues and their ability to control how and where their work is disseminated, as well as to protect users from unintentionally infringing on those rights. And to that end, the DGC is one of 68 arts groups supporting the package of amendments submitted to this committee by the Canadian Conference of the Arts. I'd like to turn to Mr. Southern for a few words.
Thanks, Jerry. Anyone looking for the House, it's House MD, and it was last Monday. And the series continues until its season end, in fact, series finale sometime in April. And it is not a homegrown series, but we do have Flashpoint and Rookie Blue, which we've, and Degrassi, of course, which is the great pioneer in Canadian-made homegrown TV series, which have completely won over the world in the last decade and a half. Today, we'd like to discuss an issue not covered by the CCA submission yet, which is of huge importance to the DGC. This committee review creates the opportunity to provide clarity in respect of the issue of authorship of audiovisual works. For most works in which copyright subsists under the Act, the author is self-evident. For example, the writer of a novel, the sculptor of a sculpture, the painter of a painting, and the composer of a musical score is, in each case, clearly the author of that work. We haven't the same clarity with audiovisual. The rights of the work's creators are not acknowledged under the Copyright Act with the same clarity. It's time that this gap in the Act was closed. The DGC believes a technical amendment, very narrowly framed, to define the authors of an audiovisual work as the work's credited director and writer will do just that. The director and screenwriter, of course, create the audiovisual work. The writer begins with a blank page, characters, dialogue, story elements emerge. The director imparts a three-dimensional vision to the work, casting, selecting locations, staging, edit, sound design, scoring, visual effects, color correction, all aspects of committing the work to the screen fall to the director. Defining the authors of the audiovisual work is key to giving full effect to some of the amendments included in C11, the recognition of moral rights, the use of digital rights management systems. It's important also to say that statutory recognition of authorship brings codification and clarity to the already existing rights of directors and writers, which are recognized in legal precedent and industry practice.
And the examples. The examples in legal precedent would be one of the important ones would be in Les Films Rachel Inc. versus Duker et Associés Inc. et al. In the Superior Court of Quebec, in a dispute between the creator and producer, held that the holding was that the writer and the director of director of the film under consideration was the author, and therefore the first holder of copyright. The Federal Status of the Artist Act equates directors responsible for the overall direction of audiovisual works with authors of artistic, dramatic, literary, or musical works, all of whom are authors under the current Act, all of whom are authors under the current Act. An amendment to recognize writers and directors as authors will bring the Copyright Act into line with other federal legislation, which also recognizes the authorial nature of the director's role. So there is some judicial and also legislative recognition of this core idea of authorship for directors and writers in film. The Canadian film industry also operates on the basic working assumption that directors and screenwriters have authors' rights. The DGC negotiates collective agreements that provides payment for directors for uses made of their works. The transfer of exploitation rights to producers through these contracts recognizes that directors are the first owners of copyright, or in other words, the authors of the work. Screenwriters' contracts also recognize their copyright ownership of audiovisual work, including profit-sharing provisions allowing for the collection of residual payments. So a technical amendment for C11 on this question creates no new rights, but it brings important clarity to the question of authorship. And the amendment that we're suggesting would end up in 2.2 with a definitional reference that defines author in the case of a cinematographic work in which the arrangement or acting form or any combination of incidents represented give the work a dramatic character, means the writer and director of such cinematographic work. As we noted earlier, an amendment is necessary to give full effect to some of the changes in the government's proposals in Bill C11. For example, the bill aims to clarify what constitutes an infringement of moral rights, but moral rights attach only to authors and performers. And without a definition of author for audiovisual works, directors and screenwriters are unable to assert their moral rights for their work. Bill C11 introduces a number of provisions regarding digital rights management information. DRM information is akin to a kind of digital watermark, providing information about the work and the ability to track it. And one of the important pieces of information is the author of the work. The provisions in C11 which prohibit the removal or altering of rights management information are of value to directors and writers who wish to protect their rights and royalties collected in other jurisdictions. So we need to be identified in the Act as authors. Audiovisual works should be dealt in, audiovisual creators should be dealt into all these protections that authors of other works enjoy under the Act, and it's particularly important, of course, in a digital age in which content can be sent around the world with newfound ease at a time when piracy and worldwide distribution are but a mouse click away. Clarity on the issue of authorship is vital to protect Canadian creators, directors, and screenwriters included. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope there'll be some questions on this general area following.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Now to the Writers' Union of Canada for 10 minutes.
Thank you. Members of the committee, hello, bonjour. I'm Greg Hollingshead, Chair of the Writers' Union of Canada, which represents approximately 2,000 Canadian book authors. I'm a writer myself, and for 30 years until I retired, I was an English professor at the University of Alberta. With me today is Marion Hebb, our legal counsel. Thank you for inviting me to talk to you. I know you've been hearing a lot about the expansion of fair dealing to include education. And I know you're tired of the subject, but I hope as a teacher and a writer, a consumer and a creator, I can cast some light on how and why this broad exception is likely to launch an unintended assault on the intellectual property of Canadian writers. When Bill C11 was introduced, the Honourable James Moore, Minister of Canadian Heritage, stated that when laws are clear, consumers know what the boundaries are. He also said that it is wrong not to allow people to protect what they have invested in. He was talking about digital locks, but he inadvertently put his finger on exactly what the Writers' Union believes this new education exception fails to do, and that is to give students and teachers sufficient guidance concerning what is lawful and what is not when it comes to copyright. By so failing, it fails to respect the property of creators. A few years ago, a short story of mine appeared in a print anthology for colleges and universities. For the rights to my story, I have been paid for its appearance in successive editions. But in recent years, fewer instructors have been using print textbooks in courses. Instead, the instructor creates a course pack, like this one here, from my own university, for consultation later if anyone's interested. A compilation of photocopied texts for distribution to students taking a particular course. This one provides sections or chapters of books plus one essay from a journal. In 2010, Canadian universities and colleges copied over 100 million pages from close to 120,000 unique titles for paper course packs alone. But increasingly, these days, the instructor will, instead of offering a course pack, post in digital form the text she wants to teach and discuss on a website devoted to the course and accessible only to those teaching or taking the course. This same short story of mine is now available through a licensing agency representing authors and publishers for any teacher in the world who chooses to include it on a course site. For this digital use, my publisher and I are paid a fee, just as I was paid a fee for the use of my work in a traditionally published text, and just as I was paid by our national licensing agency, Access Copyright, which issued a license to the university or college so that its instructors could make use of my work in a course pack or for distribution of multiple copies in the classroom. This is all good. Whether in a course pack or for distribution of multiple copies to the class or on a dedicated website, texts for a particular course are now provided much more efficiently and at a lower cost to the student. The student gets easy, cheaper access to professional Canadian texts. The writer and publisher get paid for their work, for their product. And the institution doesn't need to do the work of securing the rights to individual works or worry about its staff or its students violating copyright. The problem arises because C11 fails to make clear what sort of reproduction for educational use constitutes fair dealing and what sort does not. As an educator myself, I know that teachers are not the enemies of creators. The working teacher believes that creators should be compensated for their work. She understands that this means schools paying for a blanket license to copy. Teachers want to pay, and they have said as much to this committee and to the C32 committee. The question is what they need to pay for. And that is what Bill C11 does not as yet define. The Writers' Union of Canada believes that it needs to do so, that it is for Parliament, not the courts, to decide what the education sector needs to pay for. The larger context here is that we're all living in a culture of free digital information and entertainment. In this digital climate, human behavior can't be counted on any more than digital locks can be counted on in the realm of books, when you can buy a printer with a scanner for under $100. I can assure you from first-hand experience that if Bill C11 passes unamended in this respect, the result will be a perfect storm of unauthorized copying in the schools. It's no secret that the noisiest opposition to Bill C11 has been from people who have come to assume that free access to everything digital is their right. And it's no secret that students today have grown up in a culture that has encouraged them to expect free use of everything they can download. And it's also no secret that over 50 colleges and universities, by refusing to pay collective licensing fees, have been doing another kind of downloading onto the working teacher the responsibility, the time, the extra labor, and the liability for clearing the rights to the works she teaches. But how many teachers are going to the trouble to clear those rights when the institution they work for has rejected collective licensing, when the website for any particular course is next to impossible to police, when, to all appearances and by all reports, Bill C11 is on the way to loosen up restrictions around copyright in education, although in ways that nobody can perfectly predict. Just last week, this committee was addressed by educators who talked about the copying for classroom use of a few pages here, a few there, as a trivial matter that should be considered fair dealing. But you have to look at the aggregate. Multiply this practice by the number of classrooms in this country, where nearly 250 million pages of books are copied annually in Canadian schools, and there alone you have lost revenues to writers and publishers in the tens of millions of dollars annually. A few pages here, a few pages there, is not about ease of access to materials. It's about payment for copying. The educators are asking you to excuse them from paying for what they are already licensed to do. In its CCH ruling, the Supreme Court named damage to the market as only one of 6 or more factors to be considered when deciding if a dealing is fair, and not necessarily the most important. A dealing may be considered fair. That does damage to the market. And a few pages here and a few there in the classroom would be dealing that would do major damage to the market. This potential for damage to the market and for uncertainty of continuing investment in Canadian publishing that will result from unclear legislation are too great for Parliament to leave to the courts. We ask you, the members of this committee, to clarify the legislation, to make it evident that uses being paid for today will continue to be paid for tomorrow. Otherwise, the money the schools will save will come directly from the pockets of those who can least afford it. Canadian, in this case, Canadian writers who earn, on average, less than $20,000 a year from their writing. The Writers' Union of Canada has taken an active role in the creation of, and along with 67 other Canadian arts organizations, is a signatory to a document sent to you in January, which has been referred to by other members of this panel, with proposed amendments which address our concerns. The Writers' Union has also submitted to you a brief today to address this and other issues in Bill C11, including user-generated content and digital delivery by libraries.
Mr. Hollingshead, you're out of time. You're past the 10 minutes, so hopefully if you have any remaining comments that you can put that in during question period as well. So thank you to the witnesses. I'm wondering what Joey Jeremiah would say if he was mentioned so much sitting around this committee, but we'll move forward now for the first round of 5 minutes to Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. A very interesting presentation so far. Mr. Zestone? Yes. You said that you love mashups, and but then you drew a distinction between maybe ones that you love and ones that you don't love. Can you talk to the committee about how you defined a mashup, why you love them, but why there's some that cause concerns?
The ones that we love, and they're all over the internet, tend to be about 3 minutes long. And one of our fans has we have a couple that the fans are very enamored with, and so they'll go back. They do incredible work. It takes a lot of time. They'll take copies of the show. They may go over 20 or 50 different episodes, taking little moments from them, putting it together in a 3-minute video that glorifies this particular relationship, this particular couple. They'll put a Faith Hill song underneath it. I mean, all patently, infringements of copyright in the old days. Why we love it, how valuable is a fan that's willing to take that amount of time and is so invested in the characters on our show. So that kind of activity to us is just enormously positive. What would not be enormously positive is a 10-hour mashup in which somebody said, oh, now here are my 10 favorite episodes of Degrassi, and they put them up, and every once in a while they pop up and say, okay, now here's episode 2. You're really going to like this one because Joey does this, and then they go on. So that's really what we're talking about. I think we all know clearly in the ends what we want to achieve. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure of the exact wording. I leave that to experts. But I think if we can eliminate that side, then let's go for the real mashups.
Now, in situations, obviously, since Degrassi first came out, and I'm talking about the first one, there's been a lot of change, as you mentioned, being on the forefront of new media, and how while working in the traditional sense, you're also, from the sounds of it, exploring every opportunity to promote through new media. But can you talk about some of the copyright infringements you've dealt with, say, on your shows in the past, and how and the impact on those infringements on your on business?
Well, we are a small company, so we ourselves don't issue cease and desist letters, except to services like YouTube, who have in the United States, have a regime with a content ID regime in which you can give them a notice and then they'll follow up and provide some consistent application of what should or should not be on the service. We don't go after the mega uploads or the ISO hunts. In the United States, our broadcaster is one of the Viacom companies, and we understand the Viacom lawyers may do some of these activities on our behalf, but also on behalf of many of their other shows, but we don't get involved in that. It is not the case that or even 100,000 infringing uploads has the direct impact of stealing 100,000 videos from Best Buy. Clearly, copyright is. I have to acknowledge that there's something different when we've got a marginal cost of zero in terms of producing an episode, and they take that episode. Yes, we've lost an opportunity, but would those 100,000 people have bought the episode or not? Is there some value in the fact that it's going forward? I know I'm talking heretically because we all say it's absolutely horrible. Sure, when you get the show even more known, there is some value. But in the end, when you've got sites that over a 24-hour period have 600,000 illegal files being uploaded, these kind of enormous numbers, what it creates is an entire alternate universe of free, where our desire to exploit not even in an orderly way anymore, we just go for everything all at once, and we try to do it in a legal way, we try to make it available all around the world, and we just can't compete can't compete with free.
You have 10 seconds, unfortunately.
And I will take those 10 seconds to thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Mr. Moore and Mr. Stone, for your testimony. Now to Mr. Benskin for 5 minutes.
Hello. It's a bit like old home week here, because as Stephen mentioned earlier, and I also did a film with Tim Southern called Island of the Dead, for those of you who are...
Check it out.
Still available on Amazon. There seems to be sort of a climate, if I may, there seems to be a climate of where asking for remuneration, artists, creators, rights holders asking for remuneration within the business model is a bit of an irritant. And, you know, from my perspective, I'm sort of going, well, the business model exists because there's content and vice versa. If there's no content, there's no reason for people, you know, radio stations, whatever the case may be, to exist. I mean, if we go back to the old days of television, television really was about the advertising. You know, you had shows in between the advertising. Soap operas are called soap operas because Procter & Gamble and other soap manufacturers sponsored them, and they would stop where the leads would come out and say, you know, and I use, you know, X for that use. So the content is a very important part of the business model. So I mean, my first question out there would be, agree or disagree?
Agree. It's interesting to be talking so much about the internet when, in fact, we don't yet have a fungible business model across the entire spectrum of that particular platform. People expect it. People are anticipating it. But there's no question that there's content circulating on it. So I think the answer is a little more complex. I think the answer is, given that there's content circulating on that platform, how is it going to become fungible? How do we control the use or the consumption of that content on a medium that's become an expert at evading those controls or traditional controls? Content creators I guess the real answer is content creators don't exist without remuneration, and the remuneration is broken down into two components: their labor, for which they're paid on the spot, and their authorship, which constitutes an ongoing economic relationship with that work long after it's disseminated into the marketplace. And what we're seeing with the internet and with new media generally is a radical foreshortening of that ongoing economic relationship with the work once it's disseminated. And that has huge implications for creators sitting at home trying to get their next work made, and for creators going out into the labor force looking for a proper fee for their work, because producers who can't recover that money in the marketplace will turn around and offer less for the labor and for the authorship. So content is king. The question is, how do you attach a number to it? How do you attach a dollar number to it? Because and so far all of our collective agreements do attach a number to the labor and to the authorship. And our particular concern at the Directors Guild is that the dollar number attached to the authorship continue to be a reality in legal terms and in economic terms as we go forward into this new Wild West that we're dealing with.
Mr. Stone, you had mentioned in your presentation that the cyber lockers and torrent sites and so forth were areas in which you felt that some work needed to be done in terms of controlling them, because those sites are dollars lost or potential dollars lost. Would you care to expand on that a bit?
Well, I won't expand on the technical aspects, and I'll leave that to our association to do. Just going back to Mr. Noss's discussion in the earlier panel, I think he made it very clear that he wasn't disagreeing that the big guys, the bad guys, and these are the cyber lockers, we want to get rid of. And his concern was that the words in the enabling legislation didn't hurt the small people. We're not interested in hurting the small people, but we don't want to. My understanding is that the legislation now really doesn't quite cover the big guys, that in trying to achieve a balance to help the little guys, we may have accidentally provided a safe harbor for the cyber lockers.
Okay, and I've got a few seconds left, so I'm just going to throw over to Mr. Hollingshead in terms of the discussion that's emerging in regards to teachers who feel that they want to pay and already have a regime in which they have access to copyright material through licensing, and how the fair dealing process will actually take that money out of the pockets of artists. Can you expand on that a bit more?
Well, the system in place now, collective licensing, really covers what they're doing in the classroom. When the educators want to be excused from copying a few pages here and a few pages there in the class, want that called fair dealing, then what happens is that the value of the license goes down, right? Because they're already paying for that. They don't want to pay for that anymore. And then the result is that the artists have a diminished income.
Thank you,
from copyright.
Mr. Hollingshead and Mr. Benskin. Now for another 5 minutes of questions to Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you for your presentations today. Mr. Barr, I'm going to start with you. I'm interested in some of the concerns you had over clarity. You were talking about the clarity in the legislation between the writer and the director, and I'm assuming the producer. In the way things currently work under the current legislation, can you explain to me how authorship's defined and how it works currently in the industry?
Well, I'll do both things. You've asked about, I think you've asked about how authorship is defined in legislation, and,
right.
And of course what brings us here and drives the presentation we're giving today is that there is, in fact, when it comes to audiovisual works, a gap in C11, easily corrected with a very, very narrow set of words that doesn't encroach on any of the other and multiplicity of issues that dog this package of amendments. So I think you're in and out very quickly and simply. In the industry, however, I think it's very important to notice that the industry has taken account of the kind of authorship, the clarity of authorship around authorship that we're seeking. The industry has taken account of that, and in our standard agreement with Canada's independent producers, there's a plain acknowledgement of the authorial rights of directors, and those rights and the ability of producers to repeat broadcasts is sold as a part of the compensation for directors, and screenwriters also have a similar contract arrangement with producers. So the industry takes account of these rights.
Currently, there's nothing in the current legislation which defines this, and it's taken care of within the industry itself. Why is there such a need to put this in this legislation when it's already been worked out within the industry?
There are two reasons. One is that where you negotiate it, then it's taken account of by industry, but that doesn't cover the whole terrain. And so you will end up with examples of the kind that I cited, Les Films Rachel, which was a dispute between a producer and an author. This was an unsigned film. It wasn't something that was taken account of by any collective agreement or contract arrangements. The second thing, of course, is that clarity in the law lies at the heart of a sustainable revenue stream when it comes to creators, and this is a terrific opportunity to ensure that there is clarity. It doesn't add complications, but it helps enormously going forward.
Right, and a question for Stephen. I'm sure with your background, you probably knew Neil Hope quite well.
Yes.
And I'd just like to give my condolences. I know it was a long time ago, but your whole family must have, your Degrassi family must have been quite upset last
When I was
weeks.
trying to tell my wife, and I'm tearing up even now, I was so choked up I couldn't even get the words out.
Yeah. Anyway, so my condolences on that. I know that particular show was truly groundbreaking. It has had tremendous international success. Am I right in saying that? the original series and the other series.
Between the two of them, they're in well over 100 countries around the world.
And when you do that, you must have to deal with copyright legislation internationally, all around the world.
Indeed.
Yeah. So with the new legislation coming through in C11, and you're not talking about technical details, that's not your area, but have you faced problems and hurdles having a show that's broadcast in so many different countries?
Because copyright is territorial, so when we're dealing in the United States, we're dealing with the U.S. Copyright Act, and when we're dealing in France, we're dealing with the French Copyright Act. It really it hasn't been that much of an issue. There are relatively standard terms and conditions that apply. The only thing that happens, and it's anecdotal, is really the perception internationally that Canada is a bit of a haven for piracy. And that's upsetting to all of us who are Canadians and think of ourselves as something exactly the opposite of that.
So this is one of the reasons you've encouraged us to pass the legislation as soon as possible, because we do take some steps to limit this ability to pirate international materials as well as domestic materials. Is that accurate?
It really will bring Canada into line with the rest of the world.
Yeah. Just a couple more questions. When your original series of Degrassi broke into the United States, it was almost copied immediately and put in Beverly Hills, and Beverly Hills 90210. Did you have a problem with that? Because it really was a copy of the whole theme of your show, placed with Corvettes and mansions.
Actually, no. I mean, people are entitled, you talk about format rights or rights in ideas. They were doing something very different. And the core difference between the two series is in Degrassi, there's two tenets. One is you are not alone. So you may think you're going through something horrible, but you are not alone. But the second is you have choice, but every choice has a consequence. You are empowered, but every choice has a consequence. That was never a part of 90210.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Thank you, Mr. Stone and Mr. Armstrong. And Degrassi was way much better than Beverly Hills 90210. No, we don't even need to go around that debate. So now going on to the next 5 minutes to Mr. Regan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I second that motion. Let me turn to Mr. Barr. First, I want to turn to Mr. Hollingshead and ask you, you mentioned the Supreme Court of Canada decision in the CCH case. Is it your view that incorporating the 6-step test enumerated by the Supreme Court of Canada in the bill would provide sufficient clarity, or at least some clarity?
I don't think that is enough, because it talks about 6 factors, and market impact is not the primary one. I think what the bill needs to do is what the backgrounder said it was going to do, but it doesn't at this point. Take into consideration the legitimate interests of the copyright owner, not harm the market for a work, provided the use is fair dealing use is fair, that it not harm the market for a work. I think the market impact has to be primary, and I don't think the CCH does that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Barr, in terms of extending the copyright to directors, do you see any reason to distinguish between moral rights and economic rights in this regard?
Well, I mean, both moral rights and economic rights are held by directors, certainly, and typically what happens is that in the remuneration package that directors onto which directors sign in Canada, they sell they waive the moral rights and sell the use of copyright, if I can put it that way, so for purposes of rebroadcast. And I mean, moral rights have to do with how you allow your work to be portrayed, and in what way it can be rebroadcast. It aims at ensuring that the integrity of the work is maintained, and it's referred to, of course, in the legislation. The problem that we have with the legislation, as I pointed out earlier, is that it applies only to authors. And if C11 doesn't identify the directors and screenwriters of audiovisual works as authors, then in that respect, their moral right is the waters are muddied. It's not that they don't have the right. This would not be an amendment which creates any right.
I think you've made the distinction.
Yeah.
Because in the sense of the economic right is often signed away, but the moral right not to be.
Is held.
Right.
It's held
It's held
until waived, but it's not waived for money.
Mr. Stone, what's your view on this, and what do you think would be the view of most production companies?
Unfortunately, the exact opposite.
That's why I wanted to hear it.
Of course, in the United States, it's the production company, the producer, is effectively the author and owns all rights, and they're our largest partner. The CMPA, myself personally over the years, have lobbied for a clarification that the producer be identified as the author. I thought it was a very astute question. Is there a difference between the economic rights and the moral rights? And indeed, there may well be. That could be a useful compromise in the end. To me, this is not a technical amendment. I want to make it clear that the directors perform an absolutely valuable service and a vital service in the creation of an audiovisual work, as do the writers, as does the director of photography. I mean, the camera work is essential, as do the editors, as do the sound editors, as do the music score, as do the actors. In a typical Degrassi, we use about 150 different people, all of whose contribution and talents are vital to the success of the show. There's one person who gathers those people together. There's one person who decides this is the right mix so that the team spirit is there. This is the approach we want to do, so this is appropriate for the CW as opposed to being appropriate for HBO. One person who raises the money to do all that. That person is the author, and that person is the producer.
Could I have a hot pursuit answer?
Yeah, why not?
Well, in 30 seconds, then, all I'll say is this, that it's certainly the producer's proprietarial interest in the product which is generated in cultural industry is obviously terribly important, but it's important to notice also that Mr. Stone is a member of an organization that negotiates regularly with the Directors Guild of Canada, and in the context of the agreements made with the Directors Guild, there is an unambiguous acceptance of the author's rights that attach to the director's role.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Pardon?
Glad I asked.
You sure can. Now, moving on, that's the end of our first round of 5 minutes of questions. Now moving on to the second round of 5 minutes of questioning to Mr. McColeman.
Well, thank you all for being here. And I noticed Mr. Stone shaking his head along the lines of what the response was from the Directors Guild. So I'll carry on with Mr. Regan's to get your response, because I noticed your head was shaking.
I do not believe there is anything in the independent production agreement that acknowledges in any way that the director is an author, neither in the agreement with the Writers Guild. Yes, there are royalty payments, as there are with the writers, as there are with actors, and as may be negotiated with others in the process, including other producers. But that, to me, doesn't, those kind of economic relations, which also exist in the United States, where it's very clear that the producer is the author, is in no way an acknowledgement that the director is an author.
On another line of questioning, I know it was touched on just earlier, just a bit, about piracy. And you had mentioned, Mr. Stone, in your presentation about how devastating it is to you currently. Has anyone looked at, from your business, the actual, is it possible to quantify what this might be right now that's going on and continues to grow and continues to steal? And I'd like actually a response from all the panelists, each of the groups, as to what you think the impact is on piracy today on your business.
I mean, I'll start. I don't have those over. I know our associations do, and hopefully in their briefs those types of figures are available. What I'll say very briefly, and then let the others carry on. Over the past few years, the license fees that television broadcasters can pay have lowered. And they've lowered for two reasons. They started lowering when specialty and cable started to become a force, when there were only the four big networks in the United States. Actually, at the time, there were only three. They commanded the audience, and they could pay enormous license fees. As the market became more fragmented and moved into specialty and cable, their audience also fragmented and the amount of fees that they could pay per show lowered. That is happening again in a second generation as there's fragmentation because of the Internet. So that means that if you want the same type of quality, particularly for the big budget shows, the big budget dramas, and I'll include Degrassi in there, that ideally will be replaced in some ways. We can lower costs to a certain extent, but if we want to keep the quality up to really engage the audiences, that money needs to be replaced and can be replaced through digital revenues, and indeed possibly replaced and more.
Mr. Burke?
Well, I think piracy has a vampire effect on revenues for creators and producers of creative work. If you'll allow me, Mr. McColeman, to make use of the opportunity to answer to just respond a little to my colleague, Mr. Stone. The section of the standard agreement is called Reservation of Rights, and it reads, "Nothing in this agreement or any contract for services applies to which the service agreement applies shall diminish or in otherwise existing rights of the director to collect any of the so-called author's share of secondary use payments in connection with the motion picture." So author's share is, if I can say it, author's share. And that's a copyright acknowledgement.
Over to Mr. Hollingshead or Ms. Webb.
I'm going to let Marion Hebb field this one.
I just would like to say how important the statutory damages provision is extremely important to the Writers' Union. There is a lot of piracy on the Internet now, a great deal. You hear about music a lot, but it's also happening with books and with articles and so on, so very, very important. The statutory damages is something that's very easy for a creator to follow up with because it doesn't cost very much to do. But the statutory damages provision has been weakened quite substantially by some things that I'm sure you don't think about. One of the things is there's a distinction now between commercial and non-commercial infringers, and it's left the statutory damages are only with respect to non-commercial infringements, but there are huge non-commercial infringements done by big corporations, and also there are big non-profit organizations which also do infringe copyright. So in fact, that distinction I think is something we would really like you to look at again and to reconsider. Also, it seems very unfair to writers if a whole lot of writers have had their works infringed, but only the first guy that gets to the court and says, hey, we want to be able to elect to have statutory damages, that's the only guy that can get the damages. People who come along later against that particular infringer will get nothing.
Thanks. Thank you, Ms. Hebb. Mr. McColeman, you're out of time, unfortunately. Just a reminder to the witnesses that we have a dynamic PV officer, and you do not need to touch your microphones. We'll make sure the mic's on for you. That's okay. It's just a reminder. Now moving to Mr. Cash for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. I think it's really important for this committee to hear in the real world how artists make money, how artists make a living, how writers, how filmmakers and producers, how they actually earn a living. And, because for every Degrassi that's out there, there's a lot of producers and a lot of directors, writers, who are still really struggling. And so I'd like to start by congratulating all of you for your success and for the ability that you've brought, the capacity that you brought to your respective industries. And I think it's really important, and I know you're all active as mentors as well, and that's important too. I wanted to just pick up on a couple little comments just for some clarification. With respect to, first of all, mashups, and Mr. Stone, you're feeling that actually mashups in your world, at least in terms of Degrassi, have been really helpful. It's in a sense the community conversation, if you will. Is there, in your view, is this practice monetized? In other words, are people doing this for commercial uses?
The kind of people that I was describing, absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
They don't end up making any money. Who may make money, of course, is YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Okay. And I'm wondering, Mr. Barr and Mr. Southam, how you regard mashups. I mean, do you share the same attitude as Mr. Stone on mashups?
In a couple of quick words, yes. In the general sense, it's really the issues are the revenues that attach to the sites that aggregate mashups, and then where people go, and of course they then become monetizable. Their participation is monetizable, and ads appear, and that sort of thing. The other thing is, of course, is this digest idea that Mr. Stone was talking about. It's certainly within the realm of possibility that digests would be published, and that would represent a financial drain as well. And so we agree. I would like to associate myself with what he said about that. Tim?
Well, just before you get into it, Tim, I mean, it's important to underline, from our side that our position is that we want to see artists get paid. And, if there's some organization, an ISO Hunt or a Mega Upload out there that's making money off of the work of artists and producers, then that needs to be dealt with. Now, but what you're talking about is a very different thing. And I just want to clarify that, because sometimes the distinction gets muddied, and in fact the distinction is muddied at a certain point. Okay, and that's one of the jobs we have here, is to try to make that distinction. But I wanted to just get into this issue of authorship for a second, because what we're seeing in this bill is in fact a right which musicians and content creators and owners of music, we're seeing a right that's there, and no one's disputing that it's there, and it's a right that has been monetized. No one's disputing that. But this bill creates a loophole in which users of the content, namely broadcasters, can walk through in order to not pay for that right that's already been adjudicated by the Copyright Board. What makes you think that codifying authorship of film or audiovisual works would ultimately be protected, when actually what we're seeing in this bill is the reverse, in fact, that for musicians, they're losing $21 million here at the stroke of a pen. We think that is wrong. We think it's a bad. So it's not just for musicians that this is a bad direction to go. I mean, this isn't about paying twice for something.
20 seconds.
Go ahead.
Thought I'd help you out there.
That a right is codified will not guarantee that it is effectively used. But the absence of codification of a right will certainly muddy the waters and make it much more difficult for those who legitimately have the right to assert it for purposes from both moral purposes as well as revenue purposes. So it's for that reason that we're asking for this. Not that it would create a new right, but that it would bring some clarity, and a very useful clarity, to bear, both in respect of this question of monetization of rights, but also in respect of the amendments which the government has advanced.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Sure, as a director, you could appreciate time. So, moving on to Mr. Braid for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here this afternoon. Mr. Barr, if I could start with you. Good to see you again.
See you.
On this issue of authorship, the notion of authorship for writers and directors, for audiovisual works, are we talking primarily, is your concern, TV and movie, or is it? Is that
film?
Films. Okay.
All platforms, but it's audiovisual work. Yeah.
Now, are there any other like jurisdictions around the world where writers and directors are defined as authors in similar legislation?
Mm-hmm.
Could you speak to that?
Well, yes, and the most obvious example would be the European Community, where effectively, as a matter of policy, all members of the community will identify. They may identify a number of those creators who may claim authorship in respect of an audiovisual work, but in every case, a director is identified. In every case. In some cases, screenwriters are identified, not all. In Great Britain, producers and directors are identified. So that's where Mr. Stone and I would, as it were, come together. In the United States, there's a quite fundamentally different system, and royalties are channeled to producers in the United States, but they are split by producers with writers and directors. So really, this is this array of designation is around, but I think I could fairly say that you will never find it the case that directors are not included, except here. And this is consequential.
Okay. Is it a compensation issue, though? Because it sounds like in the vast majority of situations today, as we speak, the compensation framework is negotiated. So why is this so important?
Well, it is negotiated, and the industry takes account of these authors' rights, and we do negotiate routinely. It may mean more than 100% of the original fee for a director in Canada to sell the use of this copyright. In the United States, it could be up to 300% of the original fee. So it's a very significant piece of the story. However, where it is not negotiated, and there are many examples of this, it all falls, as it were, on the floor. We have a collecting society in Canada, the Directors' Rights Collective of Canada. It receives from European collecting societies regularly remittances for compensation and royalties for based on directors' rights. We receive, but we can't give. We have no ability to collect in Canada for directors, and that creates an asymmetry which really undermines the copyright system globally, because reciprocity is at the heart of this working system. National collecting societies collect for all, and then assign those revenues. So we get revenues from Europe, but we give none back, zero.
I want to go to Mr. Stone now. If we define the author of an audiovisual work to include the director and the writer, Mr. Stone, what impact do you think that will have? Because, as we all know, everyone around this table, what we're trying to do is to balance the interests of not only creators and consumers, but all stakeholder groups with this legislation. Will we continue to have balance?
It could fundamentally change. I'll give one right in particular, the retransmission right, which in Canada there's tens of millions of dollars at stake. And it's the copyright owners of the underlying work that are entitled to this remuneration. If the directors were named the authors and therefore the first owners of copyright, what would happen? Does that suddenly mean that the producers who've raised all this money to produce these shows would ab initio not be entitled to that money? Or would it mean that as part of an industry-wide negotiation would have to take place, and effectively, in order to hire a director, they would need to assign all of those economic rights, which comes back to the comment earlier. Is there a difference between the economic rights, which I think, and certainly in the United States it's very clear, primarily flow to the producer and can be shared under negotiated industry-wide agreements? That may be one regime. The moral rights may be a separate one.
Thank you, Mr. Stone and Mr. Braid. Now moving to Monsieur Dion-Labelle pour 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Depuis
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since I started listening to the testimony of all the various groups who've appeared before this committee, we've often heard the need for a balanced bill. This is something that nearly everyone said, if not everyone. Just as people from Sodrac today said, I think that the group that represents Canadian writers do not have the impression that this is a balanced bill. If the major producers and major providers are happy to fight against piracy, that's a good thing. But I have the feeling that Mr. Hollingshead could see his work pirated by the exceptions that are currently in this bill. And so we are fighting against piracy at the industrial level, but this bill may end up legalizing a certain type of piracy against your works. Am I correct in saying that?
Are you describing what the educators want to do as piracy? Well, yes. Yeah. Because what they would like to do is have professionally produced Canadian materials available without paying anything for them.
Fait que ce piratage-là n'est pas essentiellement différent.
So that piracy isn't any different than what we're seeing on the industrial side of things. We're talking about updating our Copyright Act. And what I can see is that creators and authors in this update are losing out. Do you think that this modernization is being done at the expense of creators and authors?
I think if the bill passes unamended, yes, absolutely, it will be at the cost of creators. I don't think it would take very much to. I mean, this is, as you all know, it's a tremendously complex matter, and the whole business of balancing interests is extremely difficult. And I'm not the first to say the government has to be congratulated for taking it this far. We're just asking for that clarity, and I think. Mr. Barr asked for it earlier as well. I mean, that's what we're asking for, to defend the creator. Just clarity. It's like technical amendments, which we have suggested, brought forward, submitted. That's all.
We have about eight amendments that affect particularly the writing and publishing community that we would really like you to look at very carefully, and we've given them to the clerk.
J'aimerais que vous me parliez de, tu sais, on parle dans...
Could you please tell me about, in the summary they talk about modernizing the rights holders' rights and not take them away, according to international standards. Would your texts be better protected outside of Canada than they would be in Canada, inside Canada, if you take into account current international standards?
Provision as it's now presented in Bill C11 is going further than it is in fact going to open the door so broadly that we are extremely worried about the position of writers. We're also very worried about the user-generated content provision that has been talked about, because that, as worded, would actually allow course packs, such as my colleague has indicated to you that he has here. The wording of it is so very, very broad. So there are a number of amendments that really do worry us. We don't think they're intended to do what they, in fact, we think they will do, and what they will do is completely unpredictable. So we really are very, very keen on getting something in about the harm to the market.
Est-ce que vous voulez compléter?
Would you like to add anything to that answer? The floor is yours.
I entirely agree. I mean, it's what we're asking the committee to attempt to make good Minister Moore's commitment to clear laws and protection of investment. That's what we're asking for. Otherwise, I mean, you're robbing from those who can't afford to pay.
Thank you, Mr. Hollingshead, and Monsieur Dion-Lebel. C'est tout le temps pour les 5 minutes.
Dion-Lebel, I'm afraid your 5 minutes are up.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, actually, I think I'll follow up on that. I was going to go in a different direction, but to start, I'll follow up on that. I like to focus, because there's a lot of testimony that we've heard from people who say they're concerned about the bill being overly broad and talk a lot about things using similar language to what you've used. I actually prefer to go to the actual text of the bill and take a look at what the bill actually says. And when I look at what the bill actually says, for example, on user-generated content, which has been a concern that's been brought up here, and Ms. Hebb, you just brought it up, the bill says that basically it's not an infringement of copyright for the user-generated content. And then it goes on and lists some clarifications, and one of those is, if the use of or the authorization to disseminate the new work or other subject matter does not have a substantial adverse effect, financial or otherwise, on the exploitation or potential exploitation of the existing work or other subject matter or copy of it, or on an existing or potential market for it, including that the new work or other subject matter is not a substitute for the existing one. So when you hear that language, what part of that seems broad or unclear to you?
One of the things about the substantial adverse effect is that you won't be able to tell until after it's happened. It doesn't allow you to complain in advance.
Well, it's
so
pretty hard to. Yeah, but it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to claim anything that anybody's ever broken the law in advance.
But one of the things is these are very sort of small infringements in a way, and they're done by a lot of people. One of these works, these mashups, starts circulating around the internet, and one of the things that could happen is the cumulative effect of all these small infringements, or one infringement that goes viral on the internet, in fact has a disastrous effect on a particular thing. What if somebody writes a sequel of my novel? Maybe I think that's fine as fan fiction, but maybe it's not. Maybe they picked up the clues that I had in my earlier novel and have written the sequel that I was going to write, and then it's copied on the internet, and then people think I've copied my fan.
Trying to go back to the thing that you said about a whole bunch of small infractions. I mean, it seems to me unrealistic if I wanted to, I know that it's not applicable maybe to literature, but if I wanted to hear a song, it's probably unrealistic that I would go and watch 7 different YouTube clips to capture the whole song. I kind of would lose the context of the song. I guess it would be unlikely that I would go online and find 8 or 9 different sources to capture the completeness of Mr. Hollingshead's short story. That would seem kind of unrealistic.
But you could use the whole sound. I think my colleague said that. Stephen Stone said that there were wraparounds.
No, but the law is, again, to clarify, the law is very clear that you can't do that. It says that you can't do anything that would have a substantial adverse effect on the exploitation or potential exploitation of the existing work or other subject matter, or on an existing or potential market for it. So it's very clear that you can't do that. And I think that's important to get a clarification. Again, coming back to what the bill actually says, it's quite clear that you can't do that.
Well, you shouldn't, but you don't know what will happen if you do it.
I would say, and I'm going to go to Mr. Stone on this because I did want to get your feedback on that. When you look at the wording there, you use the example of someone running 10 episodes of Degrassi back to back as one solid YouTube clip. It seems to me that this is pretty clear that would absolutely not be allowed.
I think there's a very clear question there, and obviously you're interpreting it one way. Another person might say that the one act of uploading that onto YouTube does not, in and of itself, that single infringement doesn't cause a substantial deleterious impact on the market for Degrassi. If it's uploaded to Mega Upload and then is downloaded several other times, or if it's even uploaded onto YouTube and is then viewed a number of times, at some point it will start to have that deleterious impact. But the initial person who did it didn't do anything except one single tiny little infringement, or non-infringement under the provision now.
I don't know. I think, again, I can only read it so many times, but I would think that if somebody put a full 10 episodes of your show, which was your example, on YouTube, it would be pretty easy to argue before the courts that had a substantial adverse effect on your exploitation or potential exploitation of the existing work. I think that's pretty clear in the bill that would be not allowed.
If it is, and that's, we simply agree to disagree, that to me it's not clear that I think it could be argued the other way. You may be right. I hope you are right.
The nice thing about this process is that there are many lawyers that will be watching this, paying attention to what you and I are saying right now. And if there's a problem, we'll be getting submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Lake and Mr. Stone. Now moving to Mr. Benskin for 5 minutes. Mr. Benskin?
I just wanted to return to the to a couple of things, the mashup and monetization, and just linking those together. I had mentioned earlier that in the early days of television, it was really advertisers that drove the financing of shows, and that's still the case. The licensing agreements, the license fees at television stations are derived from advertisers who will put their money where the hottest shows are. So, you know, we all have heard the wild amounts of money that advertisers will pay for 30 seconds in the Super Bowl and so forth. So when we go to advertising on the Internet, and we look at YouTube, and we look at those user-generated sites which have banners and and have advertising, YouTube is making money off of that. And I would assume, as a good business practice, they're going to charge more for hits, for pieces that have a higher amount of hits than another. So I would put this out to both the Directors Guild and to Stephen. The monetization of the works that are being used, the infringed works that are being used, or the licensed or the not licensed works that are being used, would it be possible to derive an agreement where money would be paid from the advertiser, from the advertising pot that would be created?
Absolutely, and I think that is a very good thing. Let me make it clear, and this is maybe just a personal view. I don't care ab initio about receiving money from those mashups. Mm-hmm. They serve a wonderful purpose without receiving money. Having said that, if somebody who has no relation to creating the mashup, either the fan who spent hours compiling it or ourselves that produce the underlying work that is being mashed up, if somebody else is making some money, I'd like to share in that. That just only seems fair.
Yeah. The Directors Guild of Canada represents not only drama directors but also documentary directors, and we have an interesting internal debate. Documentary directors are copyleft. They want to use materials in the world in all forms in order to assemble arguments, film-based arguments, which are very much in their own voice. In other words, the building blocks are being used to create new films. They would like access to those original materials so that they can make those new films at a reasonable cost. On the other hand, the drama directors, and I've been both of those types of directors, say, well, you can't have my materials at any cost other than the one that we negotiate. That's the market. You can't use my part of my feature film for your purposes without paying me, and on top of that, of course, we have the moral rights issue of for what purpose are you using my film? Are you going to... I've had this experience. I made a film called One Dead Indian, where an actress in the film made a fantastic documentary portraying the Ipperwash crisis, reportraying it using large chunks of my film, and my only discomfort in all this is that it seemed like my film was in fact the truth in her documentary, whereas in my film it was just one point of view. So the entire debate around the use or reuse of materials is a fascinating one within our organization. In terms of the economic impact, I didn't need her to pay me, but had she made a whole lot of money on it, I think I would have, and my producers would have too, and they would have flowed those monies to me.
Okay. And the issue of reciprocity has come up before in terms of just WIPO compliance, in terms of the fact that I think it was you, Jerry, that said that there's money that's collected on behalf of Canadians in Europe, but because there's no reciprocity within the copyright agreement, work that's done by European artists here in Canada cannot be collected and sent to them.
Exactly.
What would your suggestion be in terms of
well, you've stated it exactly correctly, and this has been true for some time. And it's one of the reasons why, for example, I happen to know because I've certainly been copied on the correspondence. Collecting societies in Europe have been complaining rather bitterly to the chief negotiator in the Canada-European trade talks about directors in Europe being disadvantaged by the fact that in Canada there is not sufficient clarity around directors' copyright claims to enable the Directors' Rights Collective in Canada
Okay,
to.
so I'm running out of
to
time.
collect.
Thank you, Mr. Barr and Mr. Benskin. For the last 5 minutes, to Mr. Lake.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Holling said, I think I'll start this one with a point on which we agree. I would think everybody around the table would agree with the statement that creators should be paid for their work. I think that that's something that we all agree on. I guess what we're debating right now is what that looks like. And really that's what this bill is all about, is creating an environment where creators can get paid for their work. I want to talk a little bit. You're currently an English professor at U of A?
I'm retired.
You are? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember what anthology you were using, or what reading materials you were using when you did your last class?
I think it was my last class. I was teaching creative writing, so I wasn't using one. But when I was teaching the 18th century, it was Tillotson et al. It was a fortune. It was over $100 even then.
And that's the point I was going to make. As a student at the U of A, which is where I went, I remember having an anthology that I had to purchase, a hardcover. I can't remember what it was. It was very, very expensive. Many hours of work for me.
Norton's?
Yeah, and I read about 3 short stories from it because that was what was assigned. But I paid for the rest of them. It's not really a question coming out of that. Just a comment on what the problems facing some of the student groups that have come before us would be. I want to get to, if we could, your comments on fair dealing. You said that it fails to give students and teachers clarity on what is allowed. And I think you referred to the six factors that the Supreme Court said should be used to gauge fairness of the dealing. You said, I believe, and I just correct me if I'm wrong, that you thought that the effect of the dealing on the work should be the number 1 factor, that you would actually rank factors, or you kind of intimated that?
The market impact would be the number 1, I think.
Yeah, okay, and that is the effect of the dealing on the market. So would you rank the other ones then as well? You think purpose of the dealing is not something that's important? The character of the dealing is not something that's important? So that would be, for example, whether there's a single copy or multiple copies made. The amount of the dealing, you don't consider that to be important at all? Or significantly less important?
I'd rather not get into ranking in importance the factors in CCH, because really I was using it to make the point that so far what the courts are going to do with this is very uncertain. I mean, clearly the appeals board and the copyright board, the appeals court and the copyright board had a certain view of what copying would be about, and they saw the aggregate view, what a lot of copying would do to the market. But the educators have appealed more than once and currently they're in appeal to the Supreme Court on this matter. So my point was that it's not for the courts. It's for Parliament to decide. It's just too significant. The potential for uncertainty in the market and loss of income to the publishers and to the writers is simply too great. For this bill is going to pass before anything is heard from the Supreme Court next.
But the six factors exist already. We know that when we pass this bill, we know that the 6 factors apply to fair dealing.
And my point is simply that they put insufficient. They don't make market impact primary, but it's the primary consideration. And if you're talking about a few pages,
my understanding is that some of your associates don't feel the same way you do. That some would say that it needs to be flexible. In fact, I believe Access Copyright, if I'm not mistaken, said that there was a need for the flexibility there in what the court would consider among those 6 factors. I just don't understand. Again, when I'm looking at the facts, when I'm looking at what the Supreme Court says here, I don't share your sentiment that there is a lack of clarity. I think these 6 factors are very, very clear.
Perhaps Marion Hebel. Okay, go ahead.
We don't really want the 6 factors be written into the Act. We want the court is going to apply the 6 factors no matter what. That's what how the Supreme Court looks at it, how they analyze it, and how they've done that for a long time, and recently in the CCH case codified it. We are concerned about their treatment of those 6 factors because, in fact, they don't take the market factor very seriously. So we want you to write into the Act some sort of language that makes the market primary, or at least to be a major factor. We'd be happy if you would do only that. The court will continue to use.
But it's interesting that you use that argument here, but not in the UGC
Mr. Lake,
provision where it is written in.
We are out of time, unfortunately. We're well over the 5 minutes, and I appreciate Mr. Lake's tenacity in trying to get that last question in. I do want to thank the witnesses for coming today, and I appreciate your testimony and your input. I also want to remind the committee that we are the hardest working committee on the Hill, so in 14 and a half hours, we are back at it again tomorrow morning in room 253D in Center Block. Until tomorrow, this meeting is adjourned.